The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered arrogance. Karen Mitchell, HOA president of Willowbrook Estates, stood before America's most feared TV judge with the kind of smug confidence that could only come from years of terrorizing her neighbors without consequence. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at Judge Judy Files as the words that would destroy her life forever spilled from her lips. "You're being stupid, Judge. You clearly don't understand how HOA law works." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the kind of death stare that had made grown attorneys wet themselves on national television. But what happened next would leave the entire audience speechless and turn Karen Mitchell from neighborhood tyrant into the most hated woman in America. Karen had walked into that courtroom believing she was untouchable. After all, she had been the iron-fisted ruler of her suburban kingdom for 8 years, wielding HOA regulations like weapons against anyone who dared challenge her authority. She had destroyed marriages, bankrupted families, and driven decent people from their homes, with nothing more than violation notices and legal fees. Today was supposed to be just another easy victory, another chance to humiliate a homeowner who had dared to plant flowers without her permission. She had no idea that Judge Judy had spent the previous night digging through police databases, court records, and criminal background checks. She had no idea that the woman she had just called stupid knew secrets about her past that could send her to prison. The homeowner, Maria Rodriguez, sat trembling in the plaintiff's chair, clutching a folder full of HOA harassment letters that had turned her dream home into a nightmare. For 2 years, Karen had targeted Maria's family with increasingly ridiculous violations: grass too long by half an inch, Christmas decorations left up one day past the arbitrary deadline, children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. The $15,000 in fines and legal fees had nearly bankrupted the Rodriguez family, but Maria had finally found the courage to fight back. She had no idea she was about to witness the most savage judicial takedown in television history. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. In 35 years of jurisprudence, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot criminals, liars, and sociopaths within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Karen Mitchell had triggered every single one of her alarm bells the moment she walked through the door. The entitled posture, the dismissive attitude toward the plaintiff, the casual cruelty in her eyes when describing the violations. It all pointed to someone with a much darker past than suburban HOA presidency, and Judge Judy's research had confirmed her worst suspicions. Before we dive into this incredible destruction of the most hated Karen in America, make sure to hit that like button if you're ready to see Judge Judy absolutely annihilate an entitled HOA tyrant who thought she was above the law. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these explosive courtroom moments that show what happens when neighborhood bullies mess with the wrong judge. Trust me, what Judge Judy reveals about Karen's criminal past will shock you to your core. The courtroom atmosphere was electric with tension. The audience members, mostly retirees who had been watching Judge Judy for decades, sensed something different about this case. Karen's opening statement had been a masterclass in entitlement and condescension, describing Maria Rodriguez as the type of person who doesn't respect property values and claiming that her HOA violations were destroying the character of our beautiful community. She had rolled her eyes at Maria's emotional testimony about sleepless nights and her children, asking why the mean lady kept sending scary letters. The audience's murmurs of disapproval had only made Karen more defiant, more certain that she was the victim of liberal snowflakes who couldn't handle real authority. Judge Judy had listened to Karen's testimony with the patience of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She had asked seemingly innocent questions about Karen's background, her qualifications for HOA leadership, her understanding of property law. Karen had answered with increasing arrogance, clearly believing she was educating this stupid judge about the realities of maintaining an upscale neighborhood. When Judge Judy had pressed her on the seemingly excessive fines, Karen had made her fatal mistake. "Judge, with all due respect, you're being stupid. These people need to learn that actions have consequences. Maybe if you understood HOA law instead of just being a TV judge, you'd see that I'm protecting property values and community standards." The words had barely finished leaving her mouth before she realized that something had fundamentally shifted in the room. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy had been a family court judge in New York for 25 years before her television career, handling thousands of cases involving property disputes, fraud, and criminal behavior. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy's research team had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond overzealous HOA enforcement. What she didn't know was that calling Judge Judy stupid was about to trigger the most devastating criminal background revelation in courtroom television history, one that would expose her as not just a neighborhood tyrant, but something much, much worse. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen Mitchell sat in the defendant's chair with the posture of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions, her designer handbag clutched like a shield against the growing hostility from the audience. She had no idea that she was sitting on a ticking time bomb that Judge Judy was about to detonate. Behind her confident facade, cracks were already beginning to show as Judge Judy's questions became increasingly pointed. But Karen's arrogance was too deeply ingrained for her to recognize the danger she was in. This was supposed to be a simple case about unauthorized landscaping. Maria Rodriguez had planted a small flower garden in her front yard without submitting the proper HOA application, a violation that typically resulted in a warning letter and maybe a $50 fine. Instead, Karen had turned it into a 2-year campaign of harassment that had escalated far beyond anything reasonable or legal. The flower garden had become Karen's excuse to inspect every inch of the Rodriguez property, issuing violations for microscopic infractions that other homeowners routinely ignored. A single dandelion in the lawn became a $500 fine. Children's sidewalk chalk became destruction of community property. A garden hose left coiled instead of stored became improper equipment storage. But this case represented something much larger than flowers and HOA bylaws. This was about power, control, and what happens when someone with a dark past gets a taste of legal authority over their neighbors. Karen had weaponized the HOA against the Rodriguez family because Maria had made one crucial mistake. She had questioned Karen's authority during a board meeting, asking why violation notices seemed to target certain families while others were ignored. That single question had marked Maria for destruction, and Karen had spent the next 2 years proving that crossing her came with devastating consequences. The stakes couldn't have been higher for the Rodriguez family. They had sunk their life savings into their dream home in Willowbrook Estates, believing they were buying into a safe, family-friendly community. Instead, they had become prisoners in their own home, afraid to let their children play in the yard, afraid to decorate for holidays, afraid to even park their car in a way that might trigger Karen's wrath. The legal fees from fighting Karen's increasingly ridiculous violations had drained their savings and nearly destroyed their marriage. Maria's husband had wanted to just sell the house and move, but Maria refused to let Karen drive another family from their home. What made this case truly explosive was what Karen didn't know about Judge Judy's preparation. While Karen had been expecting a typical TV court appearance where she could play the role of the responsible community leader, protecting property values, Judge Judy had been conducting the kind of background investigation that would make FBI agents proud. Phone calls to former neighbors, deep dives into court records, conversations with previous HOA board members who had mysteriously resigned after working with Karen. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of someone who had been abusing positions of authority for years, someone whose behavior went far beyond overzealous rule enforcement into territory that was genuinely criminal. The audience sensed that something unprecedented was building. Regular Judge Judy viewers knew the signs, the way she leaned back in her chair when she was about to destroy someone, the slight smile that appeared when she had evidence that would devastate a defendant's case. But this felt different, more personal, more devastating than her usual takedowns of deadbeat tenants and small-time scammers. The woman sitting in the defendant's chair had no idea that she was about to become the most hated person in America, that her crimes were about to be exposed to millions of viewers who would spend the next week sharing clips of her destruction across every social media platform imaginable. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold in that courtroom, you need to know exactly who these 3 people were and what had brought them to this explosive moment. Karen Mitchell, at 52 years old, had spent the better part of 2 decades perfecting the art of wielding petty power over others. Born into a middle-class family in suburban Ohio, she had always been the type of child who tattled on classmates and demanded to speak to managers even as a teenager. Her first taste of real authority came when she married Robert Mitchell, a successful insurance executive whose income allowed her to quit her job as a bank teller and focus full-time on what she called community involvement, but what everyone else recognized as professional busybody behavior. When the Mitchells moved to Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago, Karen had immediately set her sights on the HOA board. She had campaigned on a platform of maintaining property values and community standards, which sounded reasonable, until you realized that her definition of standards involved measuring grass height with rulers and conducting surprise inspections of people's garbage cans. Within 6 months of becoming HOA president, 3 board members had resigned, unable to stomach Karen's increasingly authoritarian approach to neighborhood governance. She had transformed routine board meetings into judicial proceedings where she acted as judge, jury, and executioner for anyone who dared violate her interpretation of community rules. What made Karen truly dangerous was her complete lack of empathy, combined with an obsessive attention to detail that she weaponized against her neighbors. She kept detailed files on every resident, noting their work schedules, their visitors, their daily routines. She knew which families were struggling financially and targeted them with violations they couldn't afford to fight. She knew which residents were elderly or intimidated and used their fear to maintain compliance. Her husband Robert had initially supported her community involvement, but as the complaints and legal threats mounted, he had retreated into his work, leaving Karen free to terrorize the neighborhood without interference. Maria Rodriguez represented everything Karen despised about the changing demographics of Willowbrook Estates. A hardworking nurse who had scraped together the down payment for her dream home through double shifts and sacrifice, Maria embodied the American dream that Karen felt threatened her established order. Maria's family brought life and joy to their corner of the neighborhood with children's laughter, weekend barbecues, and the kind of genuine community spirit that made Karen's rigid rules seem even more petty and vindictive. When Maria had questioned Karen's selective enforcement during that fateful board meeting, she had unknowingly declared war on someone who had been waiting years for the right target to make an example of. The Rodriguez family's ordeal had started, small, as these campaigns of harassment always do, a polite letter about the unauthorized flower garden, followed by increasingly aggressive demands for compliance. When Maria had tried to work with Karen to find a compromise, Karen had interpreted any negotiation as defiance. The violations had multiplied exponentially, each one carefully crafted to maximize financial damage while staying just within the bounds of legal HOA enforcement. Maria's husband, Carlos, a construction worker who understood the value of following rules, had begged his wife to just comply with Karen's demands, but Maria had seen what happened to other families who submitted to Karen's tyranny, and she refused to let her children grow up believing that bullies always win. Judge Judy Files, at 78 years old, had built her reputation on an almost supernatural ability to see through lies, manipulation, and entitled behavior. Her path to television fame had been paved with 25 years as a family court judge in New York, where she had handled over 20,000 cases involving every type of human dysfunction imaginable. She had seen domestic abusers, con artists, deadbeat parents, and pathological liars, but something about Karen Mitchell had triggered her most powerful instincts. During their brief pre-show meeting, Karen had displayed the kind of casual cruelty and manipulative charm that Judge Judy associated with truly dangerous people. What set this case apart for Judge Judy was the meticulous preparation her research team had conducted. They had spoken to former neighbors from Karen's previous addresses, tracked down former HOA board members, and uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond suburban power trips. The criminal background check had revealed information that transformed this from a simple HOA dispute into something much darker and more serious. Judge Judy had spent 35 years learning to trust her instincts about people, and every instinct she had was screaming that Karen Mitchell was not just a neighborhood bully, but someone whose behavior had crossed lines that could send her to prison. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just Karen's abuse of HOA power, but criminal behavior that had been hidden for years. Judge Judy had the evidence, the experience, and the righteous anger necessary to deliver justice that had been a long time coming. Karen had no idea that her years of escaping consequences were about to end in the most public and humiliating way possible. The opening moments of the case had played out exactly as Karen expected. Judge Judy had reviewed the basic facts of the flower garden violation, and Karen had delivered what she believed was a flawless opening statement about the importance of maintaining community standards and property values. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone who had been giving similar lectures to cowed homeowners for years. "Judge, what we have here is a resident who believes the rules don't apply to her. Mrs. Rodriguez planted an unauthorized garden that violates our carefully crafted landscaping guidelines. When reasonable people pointed out her violation, she became belligerent and refused to comply." Maria's emotional testimony about the harassment her family had endured seemed to bounce right off Karen's armor of self-righteousness. When Maria broke down describing her children asking why the mean lady kept sending scary letters, Karen actually rolled her eyes and muttered something about people playing the victim card. The audience's audible gasps of disapproval only seemed to fuel Karen's sense of superiority. She clearly believed she was surrounded by bleeding hearts who couldn't appreciate the hard work of maintaining an upscale community. Judge Judy's initial questions had been deceptively gentle, almost conversational. She had asked Karen about her background, her qualifications for HOA leadership, her understanding of property law. Karen had answered with increasing confidence, clearly believing she was educating this television judge about the realities of community governance. Your Honor, I've been president for 8 years because I'm the only one willing to make the tough decisions. These people need structure. They need boundaries. Without enforcement, property values collapse and neighborhoods become chaos. The turning point came when Judge Judy pressed Karen about the escalating fines and legal fees that had nearly bankrupted the Rodriguez family. Karen's response revealed the depth of her contempt for anyone who dared challenge her authority. Judge, these people knew the rules when they moved in. If they can't afford to maintain their property properly, maybe they shouldn't live in Willowbrook Estates. Actions have consequences, and some people need to learn that lesson the hard way. It was then that Judge Judy asked the question that would seal Karen's fate. Mrs. Mitchell, in your 8 years as HOA president, how many families have moved out of Willowbrook Estates specifically because of violations and fines you've imposed? Karen's answer came without a moment's hesitation or remorse. 17 families. And the neighborhood is better for it. We maintain standards by removing people who can't meet them. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Karen seemed to realize she had revealed something ugly about herself, but her arrogance wouldn't let her back down. That's when Judge Judy leaned forward with the expression that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to be destroyed. That's very interesting, Mrs. Mitchell. Before we continue with this case, I think there are some things about your background that might be relevant to your qualifications as an HOA president. The transformation in Karen's face was instant and devastating. The smug confidence that had carried her through the entire hearing evaporated as Judge Judy opened a thick folder marked with Karen's full legal name. Mrs. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, formerly Karen Elizabeth Thompson, you have quite an interesting criminal history that I think is very relevant to your role as HOA president. Karen's mouth fell open as Judge Judy continued with surgical precision. Embezzlement from the Riverside Community Center where you served as treasurer. $47,000 stolen from the Children's Program Fund. Fraud charges for running a fake charity scam that bilked elderly residents out of their savings. And my personal favorite, impersonating a licensed real estate agent to collect illegal fees from home buyers. The courtroom erupted in gasps as Karen's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Judge Judy wasn't finished. You served 18 months in state prison and were released just 3 years before moving to Willowbrook Estates. Tell me, Mrs. Mitchell, did your HOA board know they were electing a convicted felon as their president? Karen's voice came out as a strangled whisper. That's in the past. I've changed. Judge Judy's response was swift and merciless. Have you? Because using your position to steal money from neighbors through fraudulent fines sounds exactly like your old pattern of behavior. The courtroom erupted in chaos as Karen stumbled out of her chair, her face ashen and her hands shaking uncontrollably. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood for 8 years had been reduced to a trembling shell of her former self in less than 5 minutes. Judge Judy's final ruling was swift and devastating, ordering Karen to pay Maria Rodriguez $15,000 in damages plus legal fees, effectively bankrupting the woman who had bankrupted so many others. Mrs. Mitchell, you are a predator who used your position to abuse innocent families. This court finds you guilty of harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. The audience's reaction was immediate and electric. Spontaneous applause broke out as Maria Rodriguez collapsed into tears of relief, finally vindicated after 2 years of torture. Social media exploded within minutes of the show airing, with clips of Karen calling Judge Judy stupid going viral across every platform. The hashtag Karen's Gonna Karen began trending as millions of viewers shared their own HOA horror stories and celebrated seeing the ultimate entitled neighbor get her comeuppance. If you're loving watching this criminal Karen get absolutely destroyed by Judge Judy, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think should happen to HOA tyrants who abuse their power. Should convicted felons be allowed to run neighborhood associations? Back in Willowbrook Estates, the fallout was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours of the episode airing, the HOA board held an emergency meeting to remove Karen from her position. 17 families who had been driven from the neighborhood by Karen's harassment began planning a class action lawsuit. Property management companies across the country implemented new background check requirements for HOA leadership positions, with many citing the Judge Judy case as the catalyst for policy changes. 6 months after her humiliation on national television, Karen Mitchell's life had completely unraveled. The criminal background revelation had triggered a full investigation by state prosecutors, resulting in additional fraud charges for her illegal collection of HOA fines. Her husband, Robert, filed for divorce, claiming he had no idea about her criminal past when they married. The couple's assets were frozen pending restitution payments to the families Karen had harassed and financially destroyed over the years. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Estates underwent a complete transformation. The new HOA board, elected after Karen's removal, implemented transparent policies and reasonable enforcement procedures. Property values actually increased as the neighborhood became known for its community spirit rather than its tyrannical leadership. Maria Rodriguez was elected to the board, using her experience to protect other families from the kind of harassment she had endured. The case became a landmark moment in television history, studied by legal experts and communication scholars as the perfect example of investigative justice. Judge Judy's methodical destruction of Karen's facade reminded viewers that bullies often hide dark secrets and that real justice requires looking beyond surface claims to uncover the truth. This story proves that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, accountability always catches up with them. Karen thought calling Judge Judy stupid would intimidate her into submission. Instead, it triggered the most thorough background investigation of her career, exposing years of criminal behavior that had been hidden behind suburban respectability. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated on more Karen takedowns and courtroom justice. The battle against entitled neighborhood tyrants is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens when the next HOA dictator thinks they can outsmart America's toughest judge. Trust me, the next episode promises to be even more satisfying than this epic destruction we just witnessed. Justice never felt so good.